A quick reminder for whoever needs to record to start.
Thanks. Yeah, Sindhura.
I have started. Thank you.
All right.
Me too.
All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of programs that the Culture Workers Support Trust is planning to host.
Shefali,
Um,
can you keep your mic little close?
can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Okay. All right. We are very grateful that all of you are here, gathered together, given how grim the situation is and difficult also due to the pandemic. And I know that many of us will have been running around to support our friends, neighbors, people from the community, just to support them in their time of dire need. So we are really, really grateful that you could make time to come for this talk. And also thank you, Suchitra and Tanveer, for agreeing to share your ideas and your time with us today. I want to briefly introduce CWST, Culture Worker Support Trust, and then Shukla will introduce our speakers for today. So CWST was set up sometime in the end of 2019, and we had been thinking about this for some time, actually before that even, and we had been feeling this need to come together as a collective body to address several things within the field of culture work. For example, thinking about generating awareness about rights among culture workers, or gathering and putting together systems of support, maybe within the field. Also, to kind of think about building, say, a pressure lobby to combat this kind of misuse of power within the field of culture work. So these were like these broad areas within which we were thinking. And then in around November 2019, the defamation case was filed against the Insta handle Heard, Seen, and to muzzle the voices of dissent raised by the Me Too movement. And we decided that this would be an important and relevant point at which to consolidate what we had been thinking. And we wanted to implead into that case in support of Heard, Seen, and at that point, we consulted a lawyer who suggested that we should get registered in order to implead into the case. And the trust was the quickest way to do it. And that's when we, five of us, came together to register ourselves as a trust and to implead into that case. So that was a kind of a trigger for putting it together, but our thought, we'd been thinking about this for a longer time. So after that, over the past year, we've met several times through closed door meetings with a number of stakeholders in the field to think about different kinds of things. For example, the scope of work of CWST, the short and long term goals that we could work with, even the structure of CWST, things regarding the kind of membership structure we might have, a draft of a constitution that we might have, and then open it out for inputs from the larger community. And also to think about programming, and this is where this is the first program that we are beginning with. But we are also looking forward to inputs regarding this. Sorry, please give me a moment. I need to move the slide. Um, oh,
It's at the Shafali, it's at the bottom. You see the arrow marks at the bottom?
oh,
Yes.
all right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Um, so, uh, So we had been thinking about the programming, and we'd love to take inputs from all of you regarding what are the other kinds of, say, discussions or workshops or talks that we should organize. And this first one also came from a felt need for a panel discussion on proposal writing. And we've also kind of received interest in thinking around censorship in the field of culture work, as well as maybe a workshop around independent publishing. But these are just a few ideas, but we would love to hear from you. And so it would be lovely if you can write to us. And I'm just sharing on the screen our email and our Facebook page and the Instagram link. I'll put these later in the chat box so that you can easily access them. And given the kind of situation we are in right now, I thought we could perhaps hear from all of you regarding, as you can see the points on the screen, what are the emergent needs that arise is perhaps in the coming month as a result of the loss of life, jobs, and support systems caused by this pandemic? And what are the specific immediate needs that have arisen again because of the pandemic, and which make it difficult for us to continue sustainably? And we invite you to also volunteer and work with us to perhaps create support systems and templates to address these specific needs arising during this time and later. And if you would like to volunteer, you could mail us at cwsd2019@gmail.com, or you could DM us on our Insta handle. So with this, I would like to hand over to Shukla.
Shukla, you're on mute. Shukla, you're on mute. Shukla, you're on mute.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. As you can see, we are still struggling with tech, but we are hoping that over a period of time, we are able to engage with a number of culture workers across the country and bring to the fore many of the issues that we face in the field. I welcome you to this evening's panel discussion, which is going to be on proposal writing. This is one of the problems that many young people bring to us, and we felt that with the pandemic that's going on, life has become extremely difficult for people working in this field. Nonetheless, there is also a future that many are looking towards, and in order to enable people to work in the field, we've brought today together two very distinguished workers in the field. Suchitra Balasubramanian is here with us today. She teaches at the School of Design at the Ambedkar University in Delhi. Her research interests are very wide, but she's interested largely in the intersection between craft and design, and also exploring the whole nationalist discourse from the early 20th century onwards. But she's also interested in what happens on account of the Cold War from the 1950s onwards. She recently put together a proposal on the life and work of the master craftsman Maneklal Gajjar, who was very closely associated with the National Institute of Design, NID, in Ahmedabad. And so she's going to show us different kinds of proposals that she has written over a period of time, to tell us what exactly, how exactly do you put your ideas across to somebody who is, creating an ecosystem to support the arts. Tanveer is an independent art historian and who works on the political and cultural history of Kashmir. He has been working with the Arts Research Program at the India Foundation for the Arts in Bangalore for about 8 years now. And he's also written extensively in various publications, national and international publications, and published essays in anthologies as well. And he also is a director of plays in English, Hindi, and Urdu, and has worked as a curator. He's conceptualized various really interesting exhibitions and performance arts programs. So I welcome both of you. And Suchitra, maybe you can start with your presentation, and after that we'll have Tanveer, Atsi, and then we'll take questions from the audience through the chat box. And so over to you, Suchitra.
Suchitra, you're muted.
I realize.
Okay.
Sorry. So thanks, Shefali and Shukla, for inviting me. Today, I thought I'll take a little time to speak in detail about a recent proposal that I wrote along with my colleague Mala Sinha, and through which we were successful in getting a grant from the India Foundation for the Arts as part of their arts research program. And Mala and I struggled quite a lot to write this because we were two people trying to put our ideas together. And I thought I could tell you the main kind of journey that we had and how we sort of came to a consensus and also the articulation of the project that we had in mind. And maybe speak for 10-15 minutes, and then maybe I could say more in the question answers. I have to say that I'm not a hugely wildly successful grant writer, but I think I have something to share in the sense of how we explored the area, explored our Mala and I, our differing and complementary starting points, and tried to articulate something that is meaningful for not just the two of us, but in a larger context. And that's what I'll say a little bit about. And then you can ask me things which perhaps I've skipped. So I'll just share my screen so that I can show you the bare bones of how we went about it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we're able to see it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so so this was the proposal that we wrote. It was entitled "In His Own Life: The Life and Work of Maniklal Gajjar, Blockmaker, Master Craftsman." And we were the two of us, Mala and I. Mala is a textile designer, and she has a block printing and textile design workshop in Baroda. So she's a practitioner, and she knew Maniklal Gajjar from the time she was a student. And after his passing away, his three daughters requested her to take all his materials from his workshop, his files, and so on. And that became the archive that we had with us and which we wanted to make sense of together. I am interested in design history. Mala is a practitioner. I'm interested in the context and the significance of what was happening in the craft world and how it intersected with design. We normally think of craft and design as two separate spheres, which are usually seen to be unrelated. usually we think that where craft ends, design begins. But in India, craft and design have porous boundaries, and this is something that was of great interest to me. I also realized that design has its own politics vis-a-vis craft, and that too is an area of interest for me. So let me say a little bit about this archive, and then you will get the context of how we built the project. So who was Maniklal Gajjar? He was a textile block maker and master craftsman from Pethapur in Gujarat. He was born in the 1930s and he died about 10 years ago. And here you can see him as a young man and as a very, very senior practitioner. And he's no ordinary practitioner of block making. And these are blocks which are made to print textiles. So he belongs, you can see on the top left, to a kind of larger caste of the Gajjars, which is who made furniture. Basically, they worked with wood. But Maniklal and his father and grandfather printed what are called the Saudagari textiles. You can see an example of it on the bottom left, which were textiles which were printed in Gujarat for a Thai and Indonesian market. So, and this has been going on since the 17th, 18th century, it is believed. But we know from Maniklal that at least from his grandfather's time, they were part of this. And in the 1940s, the World War interrupts this work and they turn to other kinds of block making. So this is the background. There's a lineage here is what I'm trying to say of a long delay. Maniklal is also highly celebrated. So you can see a visual of him getting the Master Craftsman Award from the president, Neelam Sanjeeva Reddy. And you see Pupul Jaikar. So he is enmeshed in this post-independence discourse around craftsmen. It is a discourse which goes back to the 19th century, the middle of the 19th century. So here is another kind of lineage that he becomes a part of. So the colonial government and the post-colonial government. So there's Mala, you can see her in a white dupatta. She's invited after he passes away, and on the right is his workshop and all the materials that she brought to her studio, and the archive is now in this form. It's in two almaris, 2 or 3 almaris, and it's got all of Maniklal's material. And here again, he's quite an unusual person. He's a conscientious record keeper, and he's got correspondence with clients, his account books, his letters to and from other craftspeople, photographs, and prints of his designs on paper. So in addition to that are his national awards, his tools, his little table on which he worked on, and his signboard. So here, just to give you an example of what is the kind of material there was. A lot of it is in Gujarati. This is his tourist visitor's notebook, where he had people sign in when they came to visit his workshop. This is some of the kinds of blocks that he made. He made blocks for the Ajrak printers. He made blocks for the temple cloths printed in Ahmedabad. He borrowed from Bandhani, he borrowed from Ikat. So you can see his kind of aesthetic oeuvre. You can see the sketches of how he developed his designs, the kinds of paper cuttings he kept to inspire him to create new designs, how he borrowed from Kashmir shawls or from paisley and booty and veil and flowers. These are the kind of stock in trade of so-called traditional design. But he also made these views of Bombay, you can see on the left, these typographic blocks. He also made blocks for designers. This is a series that he made for Mala for one of her projects. So he also not only worked with the traditional market, he worked with designers, because the National Institute of Design is just about 40-50 kilometers from his village Pethapur. So he is straddling these two worlds in a very, very interesting manner. On the left, you can also see some kind of very contemporary, abstract, geometrical forms that he made, the kinds of images he borrowed from, perhaps from photographs. This is one of Trafalgar Square. And this is the raw material from which we developed this proposal, which we named in his own right, The Life and Work of Maneklal Gajjar, Blockmaker and Master Craftsman. So we were trying to show how an individual, because of his own ability, effort, and his circumstances, makes this illustrious life for himself, and how he draws on his traditional training as a Gajjar community craftsperson, and he straddles the world with modern design, and he works with not only market patronage but also state patronage in the way he gets orders from the Weavers Service Center, the All India Handicrafts Board, and the honors that he receives from the Government of India. So, but why do this study? So we were trying to build a case that there is a range of books on Indian crafts, but most of them focus on the arrival of the object. So whether it's a block or a pot or a papier-mâché object, most of the descriptions that we have of crafts is through the way the object arrives. And we don't have a in-depth granular account of the creative and social world of a craftsperson. What does it mean? What does it feel like to be a craftsperson? This was our curiosity. Can we tell this story in some way to fill the lacuna in the research so far, where we really don't know what it meant to be a craftsperson? And how did they negotiate their traditional training, and how did they become part of a changing world using those skills, those techniques, and those approaches? Could we open this up for greater examination? And so what we hope to do is to uncover the world of a modern Indian craftsman. But through this, we wanted to raise larger questions. So it was not only just our curiosity about what was Maneklal Gajjar all about, but how through his life can we think about craftsmanship, this business of tradition and modern. How does caste play into this? What is the social world of a craftsperson? How does entrepreneurship play into it? How did he run his business? So we hope his account books will give us an inkling into how he actually built this practice, and how he negotiated the world of design and government patronage, and most of all the kind of interrelationships between all of these, because we didn't want to see these as separate areas, but how it comes together and is articulated in his life and his life story. So the image on the right is the board that was there outside his studio. An important part here was the fact that Mala and I both know Gujarati, we can read and write it, and so access to his world through the language also becomes important. So we also hope to look at the words he uses, and how does that come into play with the way we understand craft. So we tried to distill this into some research questions. What does the world of a craftsperson look like? What are the modes of knowledge production and transmission? So now what I'm trying to communicate is how does one use one's personal curiosity to abstract out of them larger questions which another person would be interested in. Someone who may not only think about block making, but other textile crafts or pottery or ceramics or anything else. Is there something here which is useful, which illuminates the world of craft itself? So how do traditional business relationships connect with entrepreneurship? Because caste and the whole traditional block making enterprises had long-term business interests with traders and so on. But because of the interruption of the Second World War, Maneklal and his father needed to develop new avenues. So what is the kind of agency a craftsperson has to break out of existing molds if those suddenly are impaired by some situation, like in this case, it was the war? What are the dimensions of traditional and contemporary aesthetics within the creative world of the craftsperson? So if you're getting orders from designers who are trained in a school of design and who have a different aesthetic sensibility, how do you bridge that with something which is very traditionally anchored in your training? Can we open this up to see it and break this so-called traditional modern? Because here is a person who spanned both these domains. Then what are the networks of patronage and acclaim in contemporary craft practice? Yet, what are the sort of colonial traces that we can see in which the nation state actually perpetuates colonial formats? What is the importance of place in a craftsman's life? So Pethapur is, the economy of Pethapur is actually sustained by block makers. And it has been for several hundred years. So how do we configure the importance of place and its connections geographically with all the way to Indonesia and Thailand? And I've spoken about this before. What are the aesthetic, processual, and social connections between traditional and modern? So this is a part of an abiding long-term interest of mine, to actually explore what is traditional and what is modern and what would be, I'm beginning to think that these are problematic categories, but through this work, I hope to open it up both for myself intellectually, as well as sort of enter the discourse around these ideas. So what we wrote finally was that based on these research questions, Mala and I hope to break new ground in the entangled relationship between so-called traditional craft and modern design by demonstrating that these seemingly disconnected fields, craft and design, are indeed mutually constitutive in the unique historical context of contemporary India spanning the 19th and 20th century. So this is what we hope to say through this work. And what we also did was to kind of make I hope you can see this whole thing, a kind of a representation of the span of what we were imagining. So we tried to plot it in the relationships so that it could be seen at a glance. Actually, we were doing this more for ourselves, and then we finally put it into the proposal, thinking that a way in which we make sense of it might help someone who's trying to read this and also understand its worth. So how Maneklal is at the center of intersecting ideas was what we tried to represent through this. So his business world, the craft world, the kind of markets that he had. So through block printers, through international traders, onto Indonesia. So you can see in the arrows going up. Below, exactly the sort of so-called opposite, which is through designers, he reaches a modern urban fashion sphere. Also the global demand for his work. through a non-traditional kind of route. Then you see the patronage and acclaim he gets, the government recognition, the number of academics who visited him, and the books and articles that are written about him, and the museum and archives which collected his work, and the design schools where he was invited as a teacher. So he also taught his daughters. He didn't have any sons. So here he breaks this kind of gender role within traditional crafts. So for the design school, he's a modern teacher. In his craft community, he's a modern iconoclast because he teaches his daughters. So moving to the left, we see the social world, the Gajjar caste, learning in the caste, and the caste profession dynamics. We have since found out that he had quite a tense relationship with his colleagues in Petapur. And this intersects with his personal world of family and daughters. So this in a kind of single diagram is the span of our ideas and the materials that we had more or less at our disposal. So we wanted to bring together a practice-based approach and a design historical approach. And we tried to, we were just not two friends kind of wanting to work together, but we each brought a very different way of looking at things. I would never know what it is to run a business and enterprise, which is based on a textile craft, which Mala does. And therefore, when she looks at his prints and she has his blog, she's interacted with him over a period of time. She has insights which my design historian approach will be complemented by it. So reproducing the blocks, printing the fabrics, trying to see what it looks like as yardage. We hope to enter the way he's thinking about space, about form, about material, and so on. Whereas the design historical approach, getting oral testimonies, looking at secondary materials, looking at what blocks are there in museums, why have they been acquired. So we were hoping to bring these two complementary approaches. And through this, we hoped to write an illustrated monograph on Maniklal Gajjar and also create an immersive exhibition through which one could kind of understand his world. So this is the structure we arrived at after kind of having a lot of conversations between Mala and me, trying to find. So the proposal actually expresses our common interests in a kind of articulated fashion. We were very fortunate in being able to talk to Tanveer before we sent the proposal, and we had a friend, Ushmita, who read our proposal. And I also want, based on these inputs that we had, give you some suggestions about what to watch out for when you write your proposal. So the first thing is to read the outline, which is expressed by the donor. So in this case, IFA, and Mala and I sent a rough outline of a totally different proposal to Tanveer, and he wrote back very swiftly and he said, I've taken a look at your proposal, but will you please go and look at the call for proposals and what we are actually looking for, because your proposal doesn't meet the ideas that we have expressed in our call. So first of all, read the outline of the donor and make sure you meet their requirements. And this is not only about what they are looking for in proposals. So we had earlier written about something else, and we had written about documenting another collection. And when we read the outline, we had to be reminded that documentation is not what this grant is for. So it would be kind of rejected straight away because we had not actually internalized what the donor was looking for, what the grant making organization is looking for. So be sure. So a lot of rewriting was about making our interests speak to what the donor wanted. Can we find a place of intersection? Can we write it in a way so we're not only changing our ideas to suit the donor? That's not what you're going to do, because finally we have to do the work and deliver the project. And so it's better to find intersections between your ideas and what the grant making organizations constraints are, or what they in which way are they looking at this whole activity. So it also includes word limits. We are at the moment writing another proposal which has a very strict word limit. Actually, it has a page limit. It shouldn't exceed 7 pages. What I just showed you, what we wrote for the IFA was 23 pages. So obviously this kind of luxury may not be available with different kinds of grant calls. So do look at that very quickly. And also what exactly is being funded and what is not. So this is another thing which we had neglected in the early rounds of writing. I have to also share that we wrote about 16 or 17 drafts in order to get to what might have seemed to you as a very articulate kind of way of putting the proposal. We struggled to do it, and in the process it really crystallized, our own ideas crystallized for ourselves. So that is important. So you're not doing it only for the donor, you're actually doing it for yourself, trying to tell yourself clearly what it is that you're interested in, how do you want to do it, and so on. So as I was trying to say, communicate your curiosity about the subject. You should be, we were trying to be very clear about what was Mala's curiosity, what was my curiosity. Can we infect each other with the way we were thinking about this? Where was I coming from? Where was she coming from? And we had only recently met when we were talking about this archive that she had got with her. And so it was not as if we had a very long association. So we had to work with getting to know each other through our ideas. So, and retaining that kind of enthusiasm and curiosity about the subject. When Ushmita read our early draft about the other subject, she said, you haven't said anything about why is it important that this work should be done. So we spent quite a lot of time in trying to fill out the lacuna in the scholarship. The fact that we don't know the craftsman's life, that we spent quite a lot of time in trying to make it quite central to our, so what is your curiosity should become the reader's curiosity also at the other end. Remember that perhaps we may have a subject which the donor sitting on the other side may not know too much about. So can we find a way to also bring that reader into the picture and make him or her think about this material the way we are thinking about it? So, of course, we have to talk about the methods we have to do, use to do the research. That's why I spent a little time in, both Mala and I spent a little time in trying to figure out what is a practice-based approach, what are its epistemologies, what kind of window will it provide into the material, and what is the design historical approach, and what would that bring into the research, and how do we meld these two? Equally, Mala has a lot of contacts with all the people that Maniklal knew. So I think our own resources and strength also needed to be enumerated and actually put on a piece of paper so we know what is it that we already know, which are the directions which we can go, is this doable, will we be able to get this material, and what would come out of it. So we wanted something which could become something other scholars would refer to, that it could be a way by which even practitioners can understand what is the significance of their practice. So that is why we proposed a kind of monograph or a biography. Through conversations with IFA later, we also understood how important it is to expand public understanding about this. And so we added this immersive exhibition into our outcomes because it seemed very important to share the archives themselves with the public at large. And that was included into the proposal. Ushmita also, thank you, Ushmita, for your feedback. I don't know whether she's here, but we are very, very grateful for her feedback because she pointed out that the significance of this collaboration, of Mala being who she is, the experience she has, and my interests and whatever strengths I have, the significance of this collaboration needs to be explained. It's not just two friends getting together and doing something together. It was that, but it is more than that. And I've spoken to you about how we spent time in trying to figure out where each of us was coming and how complementary our approaches could be. Ushmita also pointed out that the urgency of the proposal needs to be communicated. So along with curiosity, I think it was important for us to take this feedback on board. Is why is it important to do it and do it now? So that was also a very helpful way to bring a little bit of density into what we were trying to say. But most of all, it's not a personal project alone. And we must remember that we will be supported when our work is somehow in conversation with what's the current discourse. What are people talking about craft? What are they not talking about? What is missing in the discourse? I've spoken about how we try to weave this into the proposal. But this is very important, that what conversations is your work going to have with other work that's going on, what's gone before you, and how you hope to add to the conversation and perhaps open up new spaces of of importance which needs to be addressed. And this is where we were hoping to bring practice and theoretical approaches, what I call design historical approaches, in conversation with each other, bring craft and design into conversation with one another, to bring entrepreneurship and tradition. So entrepreneurship innovation is seen to be something which is not traditional, which is new. So what is the meaning? What is the kind of discourse on new and old? What is the discourse between tradition and modern? How can our work get into conversation with all these discussions which are going on around us, and to express this in the proposal? And of course, be ready to write several drafts. And this is something that I think is important, to think of a title that sums up the project. So in his own right, was one of the many titles. We spent several days and weeks around the title because we felt that it should honor Maniklal Gajjar, for whom we have immense respect. Mala has a long association, and to bring centrality. So he is not only part of a discourse, but he is also himself, and he did many things because of the way he was and the personality he had. And we hope to also bring that out. I hope we are able to do it. But we did spend a lot of time to think up a title that sums up the project. And it also gives direction to our work. So I'd like to think that many of the things that I've spoken about was not only directed towards a grant making person reading the work, but we were also writing for ourselves, telling ourselves what it is that we are going to do, why is it important to do, how are we going to do it, is it doable, and so on. So oftentimes writing a proposal is first a conversation with yourself and then a conversation with someone who's going to support you, and eventually a conversation with everybody else who's going to see the work that's come out of this effort. So that's the project that I wanted to speak about.
So thank you so much for that, Suchitra. I think we should maybe take some of the questions that have been fielded to you directly right now, because you might forget, and then we'll do a summation later after Tanveer has done his presentation as well. But just two questions that have come up, which I think you might want to speak to right away, which is that one question is, how many times do you circulate a proposal to different agencies if, for instance, it's been rejected once and you want still to see it realized? So do you circulate it in a different form, or do you circulate the same proposal to different funding agencies? That's one question. The second question is about budgets. How do you decide a budget for a project? And of course, there would be budget constraints as well. And the third is from Geeti, which is that, you at one point mentioned traditional and urban folk. And how do you then address this in the research you undertake? How do you determine what is folk and what is urban? So these are just three quick questions that you can address maybe directly, and then we can come on, and then we can take more questions later collectively.
Yeah. Quickly, the first outline that we sent to IFA, to Tanveer for his initial comments, was withdrawn. We wrote something afresh on a totally new content, and we are taking that proposal elsewhere but rewriting it. So my personal sense is that proposals cannot be sent in the same form to different types of support agencies. That's why I said it's important to read what they are looking for, what is their sense of whom they want to support, and see how your interests can be can find a place in their interests. Can we find a meeting ground? So in this, the proposal changes, that's how I see it, and our thinking about our work may also change. So there's no one way in which we think about a piece of work. I can see that I will be interested in Maniklal Gajjar and his work from several different directions. So if I were to say teach a course on craft and design, I would use the same material quite differently. So I think we cannot recirculate the same proposal in every forum. It may take some refocusing and revisualizing depending on the audience. So that's the one response to the first question. About budgets, I can speak a little bit in detail about how we budgeted. It was a very modest sum that we were seeking. Modest in the sense of it's generous, but it is modest. It would also circumscribe our work. So there is a whole different aspect on how budgets also form the kind of boundaries around our work. And budget in terms of money, budget in terms of time, the time available. So the IFA grant is for a year. So what can you do in a year? So that's also a way. So I use the word budget in a scoping sense, both monetary scoping and temporal scoping. If there's time later, I can show you the budget and how we spent lots of time over it. I can share that bit also. I said traditional and modern, perhaps. I don't remember urban, but I see both of these in quote marks. So I refer, when I use the word traditional, I'm thinking about intergenerational practice, which is intergenerational, seemingly without change. So I would like to contest the word traditional through this work. And Maniklal's the people who are interested in Maniklal's work, who commissioned work from him, were primarily urban. It was urban Indonesian elite, Thai elite, and though not fully, he also made blocks for traditional temple cloths, which are the Matani Pachedi. For the traditional, so-called traditional, I have many reservations about this word, but though I'm continuing to use it, Ajrak fabrics, which seemingly are unchanged over a long time. So I want to also show how there's no static tradition in this world of craft, and it's also a kind of production of colonial times. You know, this notion of traditional, which comes in opposition to industrial production. But I hope I've clarified the point that you raised about traditional and urban. If I haven't, we can bring it up again and I can say something more to be clearer.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Suchitra, because I think you've outlined very clearly how your own interests kind of grew during the course of drafting the proposal, and then how this conversation with a funding agency helped you to shape it into a coherent form. And we will now call Tanveer. There are more questions for you, but we'll take them up at the end because I think the questions speak to both of you. So over to you, Tanvi. Thank you so much for joining us.